Makutsi, and human beings can't really help themselves. Have you noticed that, Mma? We can't really help ourselves from doing things that land us in all sorts of trouble. Makutsi pondered this for a few moments. In general, she thought that Mma Ramotswe was right about matters of this sort, but she felt that this particular proposition needed a little bit more thought. She knew that there were some people who were unable to make of their lives what they wanted them to be, but then there were many others who were quite capable of keeping themselves under control. In her own case, she thought that she was able to resist temptation quite effectively. She didn't consider herself to be particularly strong, but at the same time, she didn't seem to be markedly weak. She didn't drink, nor did she overindulge in food or chocolate or anything of that sort. No, Mma Ramotswe's observation was just a little bit too sweeping, and she would have to disagree. But then the thought struck her. Could she resist a fine new pair of shoes, even if she knew that she had plenty of shoes already, which was not the case? "I think you are right, Mma," she said. "Everybody has a weakness, and most of us are not strong enough to resist it." Mma Ramotswe looked at her assistant. She had an idea what Mma Makutsi's weakness might be, and indeed, there might even be more than one. "Take Mr. J.L.B. Matukoni, for example," said Mma Ramotswe. "All men are weak," said Mma Makutsi. "That is well known." She paused. Now that Mma Ramotswe and Mr. J.L.B. Matukoni were married, it was possible that Mma Ramotswe had discovered new weaknesses in him. The mechanic was a quiet man, but it was often the mildest-looking people who did the most colourful things, in secret, of course. What could Mr. J.L.B. Matukoni get up to? It would be very interesting to hear. "Cake," said Mma Ramotswe quickly. "That is Mr. J.L.B. Matukoni's great weakness. He cannot help himself when it comes to cake. He can be manipulated very easily if he has a plate of cake in his hand." Mma Makutsi laughed. "Mma Potokwane knows that, doesn't she?" she said. "I have seen her getting Mr. J.L.B. Matukoni to do all sorts of things for her, just by offering him pieces of that fruit-cake of hers." Mma Ramotswe rolled her eyes up towards the ceiling. Mma Potokwane, the matron of the orphan farm, was her friend, and when all was said and done, she was a good woman. But she was quite ruthless when it came to getting things for the children in her care. It was she who had cajoled Mr. J.L.B. Matukoni into fostering the 2 children who now lived in their house. That had been a good thing, of course, and the children were dearly loved, but Mr. J.L.B. Matukoni had not thought the thing through, and had failed even to consult Mma Ramotswe about the whole matter. And then there were the numerous occasions on which she had prevailed upon him to spend hours of his time fixing that unreliable old water pump at the orphan farm. A pump which dated back to the days of the Protectorate, and which should have been retired and put into a museum long ago. And Mma Potokwane achieved all of this because she had a profound understanding of how men worked and what their weaknesses were. That was the secret of so many successful women. They knew about the weaknesses of men. That conversation with Mma Makutsi had taken place some days before. Now, Mma Ramotswe was sitting on the veranda of her house on Zebra Drive, late on a Saturday afternoon, reading the paper. She was the only person in the house at the time, which was unusual for a Saturday. The children were both out. Motoleli had gone to spend the weekend with a friend whose family lived out at Mokolodi. This friend's mother had picked her up in her small truck and had stored the wheelchair in the back with some large balls of string, that had aroused Mma Ramotswe's interest, but which she had not felt it her place to ask about. What could anybody want with such a quantity of string, she wondered. Most people needed very little string, if any, in their lives. But this woman, who was a beautician, seemed to need a great deal. Did beauticians have a special use for string that the rest of us knew nothing about? Mma Ramotswe asked herself. People spoke about facelifts. Did string come into facelifts? Puso, the boy who'd caused them such concern over his unpredictable behaviour, but who'd recently become much more settled, had gone off with Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni to see an important football match at the stadium. Mma Ramotswe did not consider it important in the least. She had no interest in football, and she couldn't see how it could possibly matter in the slightest who succeeded in kicking the ball into the goal the most times. But Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni clearly thought differently. He was a close follower and supporter of the Zebras, and tried to get to the stadium whenever they were playing. Fortunately, the Zebras were doing well at the moment, and this, thought Mma Ramotswe, was a good thing. It was quite possible, she felt, that Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni's depression, from which he had made a good recovery, could recur if he or the Zebras were to suffer any serious setback. So now she was alone in the house, and it seemed very quiet to her. She'd made a cup of bush tea and had drunk that thoughtfully, gazing out over the rim of her cup onto the garden to the front of the house. The sausage fruit tree, the moporoto, to which she'd never paid much attention, had taken it upon itself to produce abundant fruit this year. And 4 heavy, sausage-shaped pods had appeared at the end of a branch, bending that limb of the tree under their weight. She would have to do something about that, she thought. People knew that it was dangerous to sit under such trees, as the heavy fruit could crack open a skull if it chose to fall when a person was below. That had happened to a friend of her father's many years ago, and the blow that he had received had cracked his skull and damaged his brain, making it difficult for him to speak. She remembered him when she was a child, struggling to make himself understood, and her father had explained that he had sat under a sausage tree and had gone to sleep, and this was the result. She made a mental note to warn the children, and to get Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni to knock the fruit down with a pole before anybody was hurt. And then she turned back to her cup of tea and to her perusal of the copy of the Daily News, which she'd unfolded on her lap. She'd read the first 4 pages of the paper and gone through the small advertisements with her usual care. There was much to be learned from the small advertisements, with their offers of irrigation pipes for farmers, used vans, jobs of various sorts, plots of land with house construction permission, and bargain furniture. Not only could one keep up to date with what things cost, but there was also a great deal of social detail to be garnered from this source. That day, for instance, there was a statement by a Mr. Herbert Motimedi that he would not be responsible for any debts incurred by Mrs. Boipelo Motimedi, which effectively informed the public that Herbert and Boipelo were no longer on close terms. Which did not surprise Mma Ramotswe, as it happened, because she'd always felt that that particular marriage was not a good idea, in view of the fact that Boipelo Motimedi had gone through 3 husbands before she found Herbert, and 2 of these previous husbands had been declared bankrupt. She smiled at that, and skimmed over the remaining advertisements before turning the page and getting to the column that interested her more than anything else in the newspaper. Some months earlier, the newspaper had announced to its readers that they would be starting a new feature. "If you have any problems," the paper said, "then you should write to our new exclusive columnist, Auntie Imang, who will give